And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our great friend from radio, Teresa Tomeo, is the author of Everything's Coming Up, Rosie, 10 Things My Feisty Italian-American Mom Taught Me About Living a Godly Life, published by our friends over at Sophia Press. And of course, we always have a pleasure to see you in person, right? Because we get to talk on a weekly basis on the radio about our programming and sometimes some interesting topics. So speaking of topics, how did this become a topic you wanted to write about?
Well, you know, the title is I think, very true in terms of my mom was a feisty Italian-American and from the East Coast, Jersey City, where I was born. And she used to have these funny sayings that I just laughed at and rolled my eyes at when I was growing up, and then realized after she passed 5 years ago now, right before COVID, that you know, as you grow up, you ignore your parents and you realize that a lot of what they had to say was probably spot on. And I actually turned it into a talk, some of the things that she said. And the talk was so successful, and the women especially were rolling in the aisles. And I thought, you know, this might be a nice book just to kind of help people. It was meant for several reasons in terms of the funny things she said that were very true, but also a catharsis for a lot of people who may have broken relationships with their moms.
Right, and you see a lot of that even with people who had broken relationships when their mother's gone, and actually the level of grieving you see in missing that relationship.
Yes, can be very deep.
Right, absolutely. Well, you have in the beginning the dedication to my late mother, Rosie, and you say, thank you especially for raising me in the Catholic faith. And you said, for my husband, Deacon Dom, thank you for loving my mother and reminding me to appreciate Rosie despite the mother-daughter challenges.
Yeah, there were challenges, and one of the reasons I also wrote the book is because it was a catharsis, because I was actually, and I talked to Raymond Arroyo about this in the interview that we did, I was actually closer to my father than my mother, and it's interesting what God gives you to work things out, and if you accept it, He gives you the time to work it out, because my father died very suddenly, and I was devastated, extremely close to him. It wasn't a shock, but it's still a shock when they die because he was very sick, but my mom lasted, because she's very feisty, another 10 years, and we didn't have, we disagreed about a lot of things. I mean, we got along, but there was some tension there. Right. And so as she started to go downhill health-wise, it was my husband and I that took over her care, and we were able to work through a lot of our disagreements and get closer.
Did you live near each other?
Yes, very close, but it was so funny because I really used to tease her and say, you love my husband more than you love me.
Well, let me ask you, was it you were closer to your dad because your dad was more like you, or because your mother was more like you?
No, I think it was because well, my mother and I were a lot alike, both very feisty and had our own ideas. But my father was way before his time. My father raised 3 girls, you know, Italian-American, you know, raised in a huge Italian family that was somewhat chauvinistic, and he wanted a different thing for his girls. And he was the one who was always supporting all 3 of us. I had 2 older sisters. And you know, get your education. If you want to get married and have children, that's great, but get an education, be able to take care of yourself. He was very modern thinking because he saw women of his age struggling. And so he was the one who was really supportive of me going into broadcasting. Where my mother, the only thing she ever wanted to do, bless her heart, the time she was a child, was to raise a big family. And I, on the other hand, had the opposite approach in terms of I always wanted to be a career woman. Not that I didn't love children, but that my goal was to be a broadcaster. And so that was a little bit of a tension that she had a hard time relating to me, because Dominic and I eventually remember we couldn't have children, but didn't have children. And so that was difficult. But also I think we had some differences because we were both so opinionated and both strong-minded. But you can work through that, and you can still have a good relationship with people. And I wanted to write the book at the time because the book originally came out, I think, at 23, but leading up to that, think of all the vitriol that was going on, all the division, which unfortunately is still here,
COVID situation,
and everything. You couldn't talk to anybody, and if you disagreed with anyone on the vaccine, God forbid, so there, tried to do this book and say, look, it is possible to disagree with people and still love them.
Well,
have a relationship.
Was your Catholic faith an important connection for the 2 of you?
Yes. So she was obviously raised in the faith, and she made sure that we all went. They sacrificed to send us to Catholic grade school, made sure we got the sacraments, made sure we knew about going to Mass. And I didn't appreciate that when I was growing up. Who does, right? I fell away from the faith for 25 years, as you know. And then I realized when I started to come back, and obviously when Dominic became a deacon and how our faith was everything to us, it's like, wow, what if I had parents who didn't really care about raising you Catholic? You know, just maybe, maybe getting you baptized, but that's about it. So in that case,
and we hear
from
those people many times now. You do on your show, and
Yeah.
certainly we have on EWTN.
Absolutely. So I think the Catholic faith was a huge connection for us.
Right.
Yeah.
In the foreword, Kelly Walquist
Yeah.
wrote the foreword, and I thought it was interesting. She was talking about her own experiences, but she says, out of my pocket came a rosary commingled with a ratty old Kleenex, and I suddenly realized then and there that I had turned into my mother. Did you ever have that experience?
Oh, my husband nicknames me Rosie sometimes because you know, being from, as you are, from the East Coast, we're not exactly subtle. We're very blunt. And you know, sometimes I'll come out with some things and he'll say, "Oh, okay, Rose," because my mother would just, like, she'd come over to my house. This is a funny story. And if she didn't like the way I set something up, whether it be the way I set the table or the furniture was arranged, she'd stand there and she'd look at me with her hands and she'd do, "I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry." You know, because that was her thing. She would come in and she would. Now I do things like that. I'm like, "I'm sorry. This is not working." "Okay, Rose." So you do tend to turn, I think, into your parents, even if you don't want to admit it.
You hear it sometimes. Yeah, exactly. And of course, she talked about here in the forward about the idea of the whole concept of listening to your mother, or
Right.
listen to your mother.
Right.
You used to hear that a lot.
Yeah, listen to your mother, M-O-T-H-A,
Right.
mother with the Jersey accent. And when I grew closer to her and to my faith, I realized it was not only about her as my physical mom, my earthly mom, but it was about our Blessed Mother, and it was about the church. My mother instilled in me a huge devotion to Our Lady. My mother loved the Blessed Mother, and actually I think she felt protected by her, because I talk about the explosion in Jersey City where our apartment exploded.
Right.
And
Which brought your family
to Michigan.
Michigan, right.
And the statue of the Blessed Mother that my father, it's a white Hummel statue, and I have it now at my house, was on a shelf in their apartment in Jersey City. And even though the apartment blew up, that statue was unscathed, and it was sitting there when she went back to reclaim whatever belongings they could reclaim. There was that statue of the Blessed Mother, which she eventually brought to Michigan. So she always felt that Mary had been protecting the family. And she passed that on to us.
Right.
Yeah.
In the introduction, you talk about the fact that ever notice that common sense isn't so common anymore. Now, this book is a couple years old. Do you think it's getting a little more common?
I hope so. I think what's happening is I think the scales are falling off of people's eyes. And sometimes I think things have to get really bad, just like in your own personal life, for people to wake up and smell the cappuccino, as I like to say.
Right.
And I think in the past 4 or 5 years, things were getting very bad. And I think even in our own Catholic faith, where people took way too much for granted, thinking that they're always going to have the church, or always, we'll always have the church, but always be able to go to Mass anywhere we want. You know, the last couple of years, it was getting, you and I have talked about this, it's getting pretty questionable in terms of the way they were going after, especially Catholics, but other Christians.
Well, we had the FBI stories.
The FBI stories, and then we have
what they were doing to pro-lifers.
Pro-lifers who was
face
arrested with the DEA coming to,
right.
are you kidding me, coming to his house? And so I think it was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And people started to see that and think, wow. You know, and then my husband being a deacon and me being a Catholic talk show host, I think our family members started to take a little bit more notice and say, you guys are on you have a target on your back. I'm like, yeah.
Right.
You know, so yes, I think their common sense is slowly becoming common again.
Now, you mentioned the fact that you always call her Ma, but her friends called her Rosie Posey. Why did they call her Rosie Posey?
It was just it was a nickname, but I always, in Rosie Posey, but I also called her Nosy Rosie, because she always knew everything that was going on in everybody's life. And I think that's where I received my inquisitiveness, and because my mom was like me, very outgoing, and so she could walk into any place and people would just start talking to her, and that seems to happen to me all the time.
She was very comfortable.
Very comfortable anywhere, talking to anyone, and she was very charming, and she was a very beautiful, beautiful woman as well. But she was just funny because she still had that. She never lost the accent, and so that's how, if you notice in the top 10 things, I always talk like she did. The Blessed Mother is watching you, those kinds of things, because it's very, very charming, and that's what that was part of her nature.
Right.
And she never lost it, even after we lived in Michigan. I moved there when I was 5 or 6, and so she was 94 when she died 5 years ago. So she never lost that accent, no matter how many decades she was in Michigan.
Right. How many Rosieisms are there? Did you ever count them up?
Well, there's probably 20 or 30, but the 10 that I have in there were the best.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the funny thing was, in addition to the top 10 things, she always got words mixed up. Like, remember the old saying?
Kind of like malapropisms.
Yes, yeah. She'd say, instead of fog walks in on little cat feet, cat walks in on little fog feet. She'd get mad at us. She'd say, I've had it with you girls. I'm throwing in the table. I am throwing in the table. Ma, throwing in the towel, not table.
Yeah.
So she was really
Unless
funny.
you're Bobby Knight, then you might throw the table. of course.
Or Jesus turning the table over in the temple.
True. That's true too. You also compared her to the Marie Barone character in Everybody Loves Raymond.
Well, you got to love Marie, right? Just, walks in, takes over, and, just that personality of that very dominant but strong, but underneath it all is love, but that Italian-American mom who was just the main focus of the family, and that was my mom.
You said, as I grew older and made my way back to the Catholic Church, I discovered another feisty Italian-American, a real-life powerhouse who reminded me even more of Rosie. Her name was Mother Angelica.
Yeah. I wish I had the opportunity to meet her. I'm going to cry. I prayed at her tomb recently, and I said, I wish I would have gotten to know you, because I feel like I knew her, because we're from the same area of Italy, Calabria, and just so feisty. I love listening to Raymond Arroyo imitating her, but she was so much like my mom in the sense that she didn't take no for an answer.
Right.
She would just come in and she would just make you feel like no matter how determined you were in your position, she'd just make you, even if just, okay, where are we going to eat dinner tonight? At the end of the conversation, she was able to just turn everything and get you to agree with her. I don't know how she did it, but she did it.
Oh, no. I mean, she'd have a conversation with person. She would. I remember that when we came here, and Deacon Bill introduced us, and we were thinking of coming here possibly, and my wife was standing there, and she took my wife's hand and said, "Oh, you want to come?" Looked at her in the eye, and she said, "Yeah, I guess.
I guess I do.
And that was it.
You're done. Put a fork in you. You're done. Right.
So the first chapter of the book, for example, is dedicated to one of Rosie's most common quips: "Offer it up to God." And I always think that is really the most Catholic consideration, really, and understanding. It's the one thing the Catholic Church really is able to deal with that virtually no one else can deal with. That idea of offering it up and redemptive suffering.
And it's so, and growing up, you're like, oh yeah, and she used to tell me if I wasn't feeling well, if I had a stomach ache, offer it up to God. I'm like, what does God want with my stomach ache? That doesn't make any sense to me. But it is helping you to use that suffering, right, for greater good. And also, it reminds you that God is God and we are not, and that even if things aren't working out the way you thought they would work out, that you're putting it at the foot of the cross and you're trusting. Not that you're walking blindly and not working hard to straighten out whatever situation, but Jesus, I trust in you. Right. And putting it at the foot of the cross. And she'd say cross, C-R-O-W-S, cross. Right. Offer it up to God and put it at the foot of the cross. And it always, I think, kept me focused. Like if things weren't going right, whatever it was, I'd say, okay, Lord, your plans, not mine. Right. I'm going to give it over to you. I'm going to keep doing the way I feel I'm being directed, but I am going to offer it up. And that's probably, I think, I put it number one because it's the best advice anybody can get. Right, absolutely. When do you put on your rosy-colored glasses? And are there particular situations you use those rosy-colored glasses? Yeah, I find myself using it more and more with our godson and his children. As I said, Dominic and I weren't blessed with our own children, but we are very blessed with amazing grandnieces, and they're identical twins. He married a beautiful Italian girl, and the girls are very Italian. They're very like me. They're very loud. They're very outgoing. They're going to be 9 years old this year. And they call me Aunt Tree Tree, and Uncle Dom is Uncle Dommy. And so we're like the grandparents because their grandmother, my sister, unfortunately died of cancer right before they were born. So we've taken the role of the grandparents. And so I find myself giving advice to both my adorable nephew and his beautiful wife, but also the kids. And they cling to us like we're the grandparents on the side of the family, and they want to hear stories about my mom. They want to hear stories about their mom, their grandmother. And so I really find myself giving the very basic information because it was so simple, but it was so true, and it's easily explainable, I think, even to young kids. Like when they don't get what they want, or something like that, and they're struggling, and right now they're getting ready to make their Holy Communion because I'm really able to talk about it now with them. So, yeah. Oh, that's great. You say, I also pray this book helps in the healing process of those who do not have the best relationship with their mothers. Now, this book's been out a couple of years. Have you gotten a lot of feedback from people who say that? Yes, and it's helped a lot of people, and not just in the mother-daughter relationship, but people who have strained relationships or other relatives or friends. It's really, and the one thing that really helped me is thinking back to what she went through, what my parents went through, what my mother's family, even going all the way back to immigrants coming over all the way from Italy, and what that life was like, and how they struggled. And so it was really interesting for me to think about my mother, for example, growing up in Jersey City, having a very big Italian family, very close to her sisters and brothers, and then being uprooted, the drama of an explosion, your house exploding, right? Thank God we all survived. But that
Was
trauma,
anybody injured or killed?
in that, you know, it's so funny. In the Jersey Journal, the Jersey City Journal, my father was, there's an article in the paper, and my father was then interviewed by ABC News from New York, and I was in his arms because that was your TV debut, and you knew you were going to be a reporter. Two people died in that explosion.
Did they? Oh, okay.
Several people were injured, and it was a gas explosion. And I think about that, and back then nobody talked about PTSD. Something happened, you just moved on, right? You picked up the pieces and you moved on. Nobody went to a counselor, or or if you had a lot of money.
Suck it up.
Suck it up, or offer it up, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so the trauma of that, and then moving, to Michigan. Part of my father's family was already in Michigan, but leaving her family behind and thinking about her life really gave me, I think, a different perspective and a greater appreciation for her.
Now, you talk about one of our other great friends here, somebody who's featured on your show on a regular basis, and somebody I've gotten to know. One of my favorite Catholic teachers, noted author, theologian, physicist, Father Robert Spitzer, explains that redemptive suffering means that since we all suffer, if we allow God to use the suffering of all of us, being redeemed on some level, and how important that is. And you actually quoted a 2015 episode where Father Spitzer explained that our suffering is in this world before the ultimate redemption, which occurs in heaven and can be quite healing. And he talks about his, obviously, here's a man who, incredible visionary, I always think of in the church. And I always say he lost his sight. Mother was the great communicator. She lost her voice.
Yeah. And I think, too, that in a way, my mother was one of those, how do you say it, not like maybe an armchair theologian in the sense, obviously she didn't have the degrees that Father Spitzer, who was a brilliant man and a beautiful priest, or the platform that Mother Angelic had, but she had that common sense of an understanding of right and wrong and natural law that plays through everything, plays out through our lives if we were only able to see it. And she, through that and through these 10 things, gave me the appreciation. And it also helped me even in my work as a journalist when I was able to start connecting the dots when I finally started making my way back to the church and realizing that the common sense of the church in terms of who we are, male and female, even if you say you're a man and you're a woman, you can't be all those things, or it's not a child, it's a choice, all of that, because of the basic upbringing and those roots that were implanted in me. And I tell parents, don't give up, because teach the faith. It's going to be up to them once they get out of the house, but if you plant those roots.
That's right. That's what's important. And many times the pushback is not because the church is so wrong, it's because you start realizing that the church or your parents were right.
Yes.
And that's very annoying.
Very annoying. You sit there and you go, I hate it when she's right. She's right all the time. I hate it, but
I think about those words now, and it's like, okay. And now in each chapter here, you've got a prayer, you got a reflection with suggested for some saintly words of wisdom, and then a reflection question. And one of them was, in what areas of your life do you need to embrace the concept of offering up your sufferings and laying them at the foot of the cross? What about you?
Well, for me personally, that was a huge step for me, because my whole life since I was a child, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to do anything else but be a broadcast journalist, and I knew it from the time I was a child. I was gifted with that for whatever reason. I knew from the time I was 9 years old, and when things started to change, and I was still in the secular media, very successful, had my reversion, and I started to realize that all of a sudden I was a fish out of water because my faith was changing.
I know that experience, yes.
Yeah, right?
Right.
So you're there, and like you, when you're in the secular media, you're like, you don't fit anymore. And you're thinking, this is what I do. This is who I am. And so I literally had to just walk away.
Right.
And I just walked away from a 6-figure income, and a news director's position was my last job in the secular media. And I said, okay, I'll offer it up. And then that's when things really started to move.
Now, in one of the chapters you say, which is, remember the Blessed Mother is watching you. So many of the approved Marian apparitions in Catholic Church remind us of this Rosieism. What Rosieism is that?
That she's watching us, that she cares about us. I mean, if you look at...
So it's just that reiteration of that.
What is she always telling us? I am your mother, listen to my son. I love with San Juan Diego, she's like, it's kind of like, I know she appeared to these Aztecs, and she spoke in their language, and she appeared to this beautiful woman so they can understand. But in my Italian Jersey upbringing, I'm thinking, she's like, I'm your mother, and don't you know I'm here? What are you worried about?
Right.
So I could hear her in that voice, but I think that's what she does.
Right.
She's our mom. She's watching us. The same thing with Lourdes. The same thing with Fatima. I mean, how many more times does she have to appear and tell us that she's our mother and she loves us?
Right, exactly, and always pointing to her son. Never pointing to herself. Yeah, you mentioned here and listen to your mother. The lack of respect and appreciation for parental authority in today's world is so prevalent that it prompted a mom in California to set aside a special day to recognize the issue of National Respect for Parents Day, celebrated August 1st. Yeah, that's probably gotten worse in a lot of cases than even back, certainly back in '94.
Well, I think of, I mean, if you see, you can be in a mall and you can hear the way children talk to your parents. I wouldn't even think about it because my head would have been in Minnesota, my teeth would have been.
You wouldn't have finished a sentence.
I mean, I mean, I rarely got hit as a child, maybe a little tap on the face or something, rarely. But all my parents had to do, especially my mother, was give me the look, right?
Right.
The malocchia, right? We say in Italian, right? Yeah. So there's a level of respect that's not there anymore, and I think we see that right in our own lives. Look at the church, how we don't value authority. We don't want to listen to the church. We don't want to listen to the teachings because we know better.
Right.
And so we disrespect the church just the way we disrespect our earthly parents.
So in this section, it's not all peaches and cream, you know. Are you beginning to see a pattern here, you say? Do you see how the Lord can make limoncello, well, speaking of Joan Lewis, out of the lemons in our lives if we allow him to do that?
Yeah. Romans 8:28.
Have you found that in your life?
So the peaches and cream actually came from, was from my mom's mother, my grandma, Anna Tomeo. And she couldn't make it to my wedding because she had a very bad case of arthritis. And so she got on the phone from Jersey City and said, Teresa, I love you. I'm so happy for you and Dom. But remember, honey, it's not all peaches and cream. He's going to drive you crazy at times. But stick it with it. You know, God will be with you. So, yeah, I think everyone, especially in this country, expects everything to constantly go their way.
Right.
And they can't handle disappointment. You know, I mean, I don't know if you saw, this was, I think, 2 years ago now. There was this young woman who got a job. She graduated from college. And she got a 9-to-5 job. She was working in the business world. And she did this video. And she's sobbing because she got home at 7 o'clock and she had to make dinner and then she had to get up and do it all over again. It's like, welcome to life, you know? And she didn't know what to do with it because she couldn't see her friends during the week and she couldn't go to the gym. And I'm like, she had a job. How many people didn't have a job? And she had a job in her chosen profession. So this idea that everything has to go our way all the time. We've accepted it. We don't like to suffer. None of us does, I don't think. But this is, I think the message that I brought out in this chapter was, it's not all peaches and cream.
Right. And
deal with it and learn from it.
And even in a Christian aspect, the idea that we're not, this isn't a health and wealth gospel where if you do the sinner's prayer and everything, life's going to be perfect.
Right.
And if it's not perfect, it's your fault.
Right. Or you're not praying enough, or you didn't go to the right, church or right service or whatever. Yeah. So, and I think the lesson, and I think Catholics, as you said earlier, do it so well, is learning and growing from those mistakes. And we have so many examples in the saints.
Right, we certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Sometimes suffering is a result of our own bad choices and actions. Quite frequently, suffering is brought on by the sins of others.
Well, how many stories did I cover when I was in the secular media of someone who innocently was caught in a drunk driving accident or in a drive-by shooting and they weren't the noted target. So because we live in a fallen world, things happen. They
just happen to be in the wrong place.
And so how do we deal with that? And I can remember some of the biggest inspirations I had when I was a reporter was not big celebrities or politicians I had the opportunity to interview, but it was people who found themselves in really unfortunate circumstances. But not only were able to forgive the person who may have hurt them, whether it be a crime or a drunk driving accident, but they did something with that suffering to help others.
Right.
That was a huge lesson for me.
Well, you have the quote here from St. Teresa of Avila, one of your favorites. In light of heaven, the worst suffering on earth will be being seen to be no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. Yeah, updated, obviously.
I love her.
One of my favorite stories has to do with my mom and my Aunt Teresa on the stoop and a big dill pickle. I love the term stoop because we used to call them stoops.
Stoops, right? The porches, sitting out there. Yeah, the pickle was, a cute story because my mom was trying to impress a young boy in which she was interested.
Okay.
In whom she was interested. And he was coming down the street and they were sitting outside and my mom loved dill pickles. She was eating this big dill pickle. You know the ones they used to sell in the barrels, right? And you pick them up.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And she says to my Aunt Teresa, hold my pickle. And then when the guy walked by, pickle was gone. My Aunt Teresa ate the pickle. So just, funny, cute stories
Right,
like
right.
that,
If you want a pool, go fill up a garbage can.
Oh, that's a true story.
It's a garbage can.
Garbage can.
Okay.
We were complaining, whining, that we didn't have a pool. Our neighbors had a pool in our home in suburban Detroit. My parents, we weren't wealthy at all, middle class, basic middle class. And my mom's like, we can't afford a pool. We're not getting the pool. You got a pool a mile away, public pool, go use the public pool.
Okay.
And then one day she got so frustrated with us, she said, for crying out loud, you want a pool, go fill up a garbage can. So we did. We thought, Eureka, what a great idea. We went to the garage and there was an unused garbage can. We rinsed it out. But my sister and I were too stupid. We put the water in first before we got in. We should have got in the garbage can and put the water in. But we entertained ourselves for hours. That was our new pool. And the point of the story is you're not always, as the Rolling Stones say, you're not always going to get what you want. So try to make the most of things.
Yeah, but hopefully you can get what you need. So,
Exactly.
So speaking of need, is there a need for another book you're thinking of writing?
Gosh, I always have ideas. My passion right now is to help people come through the faith through Italy and experiences
And you
there.
have
They have
the
the
new
Italy
book?
Shrines and Wonders, so
Right.
hopefully maybe a follow-up to that. But whatever the Lord wants, I just kind of say, whatever you want me to do, just, give me an idea and I'll do it. So,
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Your clarion voice. We hear it on radio, and now we can read it as well. Teresa Tomeo, everything's coming up. Rosie, 10 things my feisty Italian-American mom taught me about living a godly life. Sophia Press, published, available through EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic. I'm Doug Keck. This has been Bookmark. We'll see you next time. Thanks.